Welcome to the Kitchen Table Progressive. Paul Richardson here, along with Joyce, Nance, inviting you to join us for an hour of casual conversation around the table, where the menu is progressive and the table manners are unapologetically liberal. On the program this week, is there a pending civil war between the MAGA right wing and the woke liberalism? Is it a politically contrived situation, and what would this conflict look like? How does the right-wing propaganda machine control these or add to and fuel these cultural divisions? We'll take a look at that. And is the country trending towards fascism? There are some properties of fascism or aspects of fascism we take a look at and compare to what's going on here in the United States, and we'll take a look at that. And we'll look at the Trump indictment on the J6 charges. And joining us around the table this week, Jen Senko, producer of the documentary film Brainwashing of My Dad. And now let's introduce Jen Senko. Jen, how you doing? Thanks for being with us.
Great. Nice to be with you.
Thanks very much for being here.
Sure.
And of course, the regular co-host of our show, Joyce Nance. She is actually working behind the scenes today for various reasons. She will chime in once in a while, but is kind of working behind the glass today. So we appreciate Jen being here to add to the conversation. We have some really hot topics for you this week. So starting with the idea of a civil war. You keep hearing the MAGA right wing saying that they want a civil war and they want it now. And is it all over Donald Trump, or Jen, is this a politically contrived thing, or did this just sort of sprout up organically with the Trump era? What is your position on that?
It started long before Trump, and it definitely wasn't organic. Trump is just the grotesque symptom, the grotesque product of decades of trying to bring the country to the right. If I may, I could just really quickly go through some of the history just to show that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So where do we start?
Oh, well, actually.
Or do you want to start in the middle?
Well, I'll start in the beginning, but
okay.
Because I think it's important to know that this all started in response to FDR's New Deal. Okay, oligarchs and the right didn't like that, and actually the first political consultants were in 1934. They were Clem Whitaker and Leon Baxter, and they developed strategies and tactics to defeat popular bills like a universal health care bill by describing the bill as socialized medicine and claiming breathlessly that it would put us on a slippery slope, to
Right.
mysterious socialism. So
that was one of the first single payer. That was actually not one of the first, but it was probably about the second single payer. It wasn't it?
I don't know, because my history doesn't go before.
Well, I know that Theodore Roosevelt had an idea for a single payer system, so that got flattened out. He didn't become president. So in 1934, we have there were ideas with the New Deal. So who are these guys? I've never heard of these two characters.
Yeah.
Were these Republicans?
Yeah, they were just they were a couple that were that had this business called Campaigns Inc. So they were like the first political consultants, and they were hired by a bunch of different corporations, of course, and Republicans. And one of the main means of their attack was to, of their tactics was to, number one, attack, and then the other was to be the voice of the people. So they were kind of the seed, but then later on, it kind of kicks off more in the 50s in Nancy McLean's book, Democracy in Chains.
Right.
She talks about this economist and libertarian, James McGill Buchanan, who after the Brown versus Board of Education, he flipped out, and that's when he just got so pissed off about it that he started to organize to preserve the power of rich white elite. And then Charles Koch, this was the dad Koch, he heard about it and joined up with Buchanan and helped seed that and with money and everything. And that developed. Koch was actually one of the backers for the far right Birch Society. That happened like just 4 years later after these guys got together. And the Birch Society, they were just crazy obsessed about communism. They even accused President Eisenhower, a four-star general, of being a communist, and they opposed women's rights and civil rights. And back then, I remember growing up in the 60s, they were considered crazy. And then, like, the Tea Party became the Birch Society. So the Birch Society now is here in the modern Republican Party. The Goldwater, he was hooked up with the Birch Society, and because they were considered so nutty, people were still in love with Medicare and Social Security and looking forward to civil liberties. Goldwater lost to Johnson in a landslide, and so because of that, in the 60s, Republicans came up with this the Southern strategy, which was devised in order to appeal to racist Democrats in the South. It was a strategy of division, and Nixon ran on that. But also in the 60s, because Goldwater lost, and they figured, well, this is due to the media, like being fair, being accurate. A watchdog group called AIM was put together in order to create the image of the mainstream media as being very liberal. And so that's why you hear today the liberal media, and that's why a lot of people don't trust the media, the regular media. I mean, the regular media, corporate media, it certainly has its faults, but it's very limited in its scope and what it reports on. We've got this much information, it reports on this much, which is safe for corporations, but they're generally truthful. They're certainly not liberal. Maybe they were years ago, but they've been so intimidated by the right and accused. It's like they're like abused housewives. But the vast right-wing conspiracy really got its legs and its power in 1971 with the Lewis Powell memo. Do you know about that, Paul? You probably do, right?
Explain what it is. Can you
Okay.
can you hear me? Yeah.
It was it was an anti-New Deal blueprint, essentially. The commerce, what is it? Anyway, it was in all the big corporations and business community. They were really unhappy about the social changes that were going on, in the 60s and 70s, and Ralph Nader fighting for consumer rights, aka the dreaded by Republicans regulations. And it outlined how right-wing think tanks could be created and funded in order to influence the populace to believe in the free market economy, deregulation. And they also devised plans on how to influence college campuses, the pulpits, literary journals, and most importantly, the media. They wanted a small, ineffectual government in order to have deregulation and no taxes on the wealthy policy. And this I can't even emphasize how huge this was and how effective it was. And it was actually reported on at the time, but nobody could conceive of it, just like the notion of the big lie. Like, it's just so inconceivable. Like, uh, anyway, like, people didn't grasp it. But yeah, so that was the Heritage Foundation came out of that. And then, in the 80s, the evangelicals got in the picture because they had similar goals. And the CNP, which is the Council for National Policy, in 1981 was organized. And it was a mixed bag of, like, uh, oil barons, evangelicals, fundamentalists, oligarchs, and gun lobbyists. They all were contriving to limit the scope of government and the rights of others. It dreamed of restoring a 19th century, like, patriarchy. Um, and that's how come it, today is so splintered. And so this cancer is so metastasized. But anyway, because I don't want to be too lengthy, I'll just skip the Heritage Foundation. I'll skip Reagan's deregulation, Grover Norquist's Wednesday meetings, cutting taxes for the wealthy, and jump to how Reagan weakened the FCC by cutting funding and stuffed it with media moguls. And it also, by the way, lifted, it's not funny, a limit on children's TV commercials, like how many commercials you could have on children's television shows. But two of the most harmful things that Nixon did was, number one, made Rupert Murdoch a citizen of the United States, so he could buy all the media he wanted. And number two, he got rid of the fairness doctrine. And then, so subsequently, a year later, okay, so yeah, the once the fairness doctrine was gone, henceforth the doors of evil opened, and Rush Limbaugh came in and went national, so he could be heard all over the country. And even in the 90s, Republicans managed to get him on our military bases, which is really horrible. Now Fox is played on military bases.
Okay, back with you here on Kitchen Table Progressive here on AM 820 WCPT, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Jen, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you well.
Oh, okay, good. Okay,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if my microphone. Let's go because I had a question about the Powell Doctrine.
Yeah.
So it was a very comprehensive thing. It wasn't just a memo, right? Or the Powell memo or whatever. It was a comprehensive plan, right?
Oh, yeah, it was very detailed. And yeah, it was the Chamber of Commerce hired the corporate lawyer, Lewis Powell, who later Nixon appointed as a Supreme Court justice, to write this up. Because
so it wasn't like a memo, like a sticky note which says I mean, it kind of reminds me of in the Coolidge era, it was America's business is business. That was, he kind of like fleshed that out in spades, as they say, that it was all about business and deregulation and simply just, yeah.
Who was that?
I was going to say during the Calvin Coolidge administration, their slogan was the business of America is business.
Yeah.
And so it was like the Lewis Powell memo was pretty much fleshed that out in, on steroids. It was more than just a slogan. So
yeah, well said. It was that on steroids. I mean,
it was
was the basis for the vast right-wing conspiracy. That's,
Right.
if you get it, that's exactly what it was.
Right. So the here in segment 2, we're going to talk about the so this civil war has been brewing to there must have been some way to swing a cultural divide, that liberals were evil and liberalism was, because you have to convince people that liberalism is what's ruining it for you. And at the same time, if you're big business, yeah, they know they want tax cuts and everything, but it seems like there's a lot of propaganda that goes into convincing a MAGA right wing to be on their side rather than be on the more populist liberal side, progressive side, which is for the people. So, you're the expert on one of the biggest propaganda propaganda machines in America, probably in the world, and that is Fox News. So, how do they go about doing that?
Right.
I mean, and this whole thing happened with, and talk about, I know you didn't want to talk too much about brainwashing of my dad, but talk a little bit about it so people, to get people familiar who might not have had a chance to see it or read the book, talk about what that's about.
Well, Fox, not news, I call it. It probably wouldn't have been possible if Clinton and Newt Gingrich hadn't come up with the Telecommunications Act.
Right.
It was a bill that they signed in 1996, and it essentially destroyed FDR's Communications Act, which gave the FCC the power to allocate public licenses to anybody or any corporation that could afford to buy one. So, that's when the big corporations and the right with a plan, this whole plan in mind, started buying up media. And 1 year after that, that's when Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes created Fox. And the whole purpose of Fox, actually, Roger Ailes had kind of spelled it out in 1970 when he had, and this was just a memo to Nixon to how to create TV, just TV news just for the GOP, being able to sway more voters to vote Republican. And that was the whole intent of Fox back then. And they pretty much cleared it out. And this was, Rush Limbaugh was bad enough, but then Fox came in and it was like a 1-2 punch. And people like my father and a lot of older men really fell for it because it was expert in. Roger Ailes understood that in order to convince people of something, get them angry, display emotion, get them to feel emotion, because we humans, emotion overrides our rationale. It's actually a scientific thing. We have this primitive part of our brain called the amygdala, and like from years ago, prehistoric times, a white leopard with saber-toothed leopard, whatever, jumps out at you, your fight or flight system is activated, so you can either get away or fight. So that's what happens when people watch Fox, is their amygdala kind of takes over their rational thinking, and they're in this fight or flight mode. And Roger Ailes understood a lot. He understood also that anger was addictive. It provides people with motivation, with stimulation, with a cause, and with a group that also is as angry as you are. And this is one reason why I made my film, because my hair was on fire back then. I was like, people are going to just see this as, oh, this is just the conservative show, media, news show. But I also saw other things that were going on, which were coming from think tanks, which were tons of emails that said the same thing Limbaugh said, that the same thing Fox was saying, and it was all couched in this folksy kind of tone. And I'm like, this is not good. I mean, I never imagined that it would come to an insurrection, but it did. But I knew that it was bad, and I knew that it was driving people to hate liberals and hate liberalism and Democrats. Um, I'll never forget when my dad sent me an email, one of these emails, and I was reading it. It said something about liberals hate Christmas. And I lived in New York, in the land of liberals, and we loved Christmas. I mean, we did Christmas, like nobody does Christmas. So that's when, well, I mean, there were many times when it got scary, but that really was a kick in the pants and scary too. And like, they're obviously trying to divide us. And that's what's so dangerous about Fox is it's been very successful in doing that and in pushing the envelope and the Overton window, and it has gotten more and more and more extreme. And so they get people to just accept these extreme notions. They just put a little out there at a time, a little out there at a time. They've been doing this since 1996, and now to me, they're treasonous. They're treasonous. And the fact that they're played on military bases is just absurd to me and so offensive. We taxpayers pay for the military. Well, we pay for the military, but we also, pay for everything involved with that, including what they hear on military bases. And it's like as if, it's like playing Tokyo Rose back during World War II and allowing her to have a platform. So anyway, I might have rambled off a little bit, but that's why Fox has been so successful. That's why there have been copycats, and furthermore, other right-wing podcasts, because they understand the formula now. It's making people angry. That's what Rush Limbaugh said. He said, the formula is you make people angry, and they want to come back.
Jen?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not sure how our audio connection is, because I'm trying to ask you a question once in a while, and it doesn't seem like you can hear me.
Oh.
Yeah. So, well, what I wanted to ask, or at least make the point, is so when we can activate the amygdala or the fight or flight response in someone's brain, then we can get them to fear almost any stimulus, right? And then it becomes, like you said, another thing is it becomes addictive. Anger, actually, I did a paper on this in college, that anger is an addictive emotion because it makes people feel alive, like they're doing something and they're really getting, and of course, taking action when you're angry is one of the worst times to actually take action, when you're angry, but that's what they do. And so to activate that is their method to make people angry, and then they will be prejudiced towards almost any stimulus you set before them. So I think is that kind of what Fox does? Is that their theory?
Yeah, absolutely. And then it also, when you watch their news, quote unquote, newscasters or pundits, whatever they are, they act angry. Like, you think back to the days of Walter Cronkite. I'm old enough to remember when my parents watched Walter Cronkite.
Right.
And he's just this benign, calm man who objectively told you the news. And what these people do that claim to be newscasters, they sit behind the desks, they wear the suits and the clothes. Fox calls itself news, but they act angry. And so for people, that's seductive in itself. That's also convincing because you're thinking they're supposed to be objective. These are newscasters. So if even they're angry, what must this country be in? Like, holy cow. And it's infectious too, because people tend to mimic the emotions that they see on people. That's just
Right.
a human factor.
Yeah. And I think in 1996, well, Sinclair Broadcasting started in 1972 with Julius Sinclair Smith was his name, and they call it. But his sons actually took the company over in 1996, and they were the ones, as far as I read, they were the ones who created the mainstream media, because they were trying to get things. We'll be right back. Back with you on Kitchen Table Progressive. Paul Richardson here, along with Jen Senko and Joyce Nance. We're going to talk about the third segment here. Is America tending towards fascism? And underlined a couple of points that Jen made earlier in the first segment. And there is a list, and I can't remember which professor put this list together, called the 14 Characteristics of Fascism. I want to go over some of those, but let's think about the idea, and I'll go through some of these, and we'll just quickly, and we'll talk about some of them. So let's talk about first these, whether or not is this a yay or nay? Are we getting more of this or less? Because if we have more of these, we're tending towards fascism. So the first is, are we seeing, at least from the MAGA right, powerful and continuing nationalism? I think MAGA is exactly that, right? Make America great again. Yeah. That I would say their slogan alone, and that's got to be America first, and everybody else sucks. That's the first one. Let's go through another one here. Disdain for recognition of human rights. Oh my God. Can you think of any examples of the Trump administration with that?
Or DeSantis,
Or DeSantis, yeah. Yeah. Putting kids in cages, I would say that one.
Yeah.
Identification of enemies as scapegoats as a unifying cause.
Liberals.
Yeah, liberals. Yeah, exactly. Wokeism. Well, that wokeism is the new way to categorize liberals. You don't hear liberal as much as you hear wokeism, and you're turning my children gay and trans, which frankly baffles my mind that they think that a woke message is going to have more influence over their children than their own parenting. But I can see how that's a problem for them. Supremacy of the military. Oh, yeah. More military than we've ever had before.
Yeah.
Rampant sexism. Oh, you think the Dobbs decision is a prime example of that?
Yeah.
We've just lost a fundamental right. What was declared a fundamental right in 1973, 50 years ago, is no longer. I think that's a huge character. So we're 5 for 5 here. Controlled mass media. Yeah, well, we just been talking about that, is control of the media, and you can propagandize, and you just explained how they do it. So I'd say that's certainly part of it. Obsession with national security. That's kind of a joke. I don't know if Donald Trump actually passes that test of being obsessed with national security while he's taking classified documents to his rat-infested rundown golf home, Mar-a-Lago. But that's, oh yeah, okay.
That's obsessed in another way.
Yes,
maybe selling national security secrets.
Yeah, in the bathroom. It's
Yeah.
always in the bathroom,
Yeah, that's where the Jews go down.
tapping his foot in the stall.
Yeah.
Then, well, religion and government are intertwined. Well, that's what white nationalism, white Christian nationalism is. That's how much have we heard from these MAGA right people that, well, people who want liberals should be killed, gays should be killed, and it's all based in this crazy and twisted and corrupted ideas about Christianity, which are not Christian at all. Corporate power is protected. Certainly, that's the corporations. That's what the whole thing from the James Buchanan era was all about, and since the Calvin Coolidge administration was the business of America is business, and then the whole democracy in chains scenario that you described there. Labor power is suppressed. Yeah, get rid of unions for sure. People have to work for nothing and maybe for script. Disdain for intellectuals and the arts. Oh, definitely. Anti-intellectualism is always associated with the rise of fascism.
Yeah.
Obsession with crime and punishment. Oh yeah, lock her up. We're gonna lock her up, even though she doesn't. In the Biden crime family, there's a guy who's been indicted 3 times, talking about the Biden 3 indictments, 2 impeachments, 2 civil indictments, and he's talking about the Biden crime family, crime and punishment. Yeah, isn't that the pot calling the kettle black? Rampant cronyism and corruption. Oh, Donald Trump doesn't have any cronyism, does he? Oh, come on, Rudy Giuliani, and I mean, what a pathetic human being he's become. I don't know who's fallen more, Donald Trump or Rudy Giuliani. And finally, fraudulent elections. And of course, they're complaining about the elections. They were the basis, and then I would add to this list projection. Everything that they do, they project onto the. That's what the Democrats do. But that's all that's what they're doing. But
that's a girl special.
Yeah, it's exactly right. So, in terms of those, how do those fit into some of the things that you had in mind, Jen?
Well, how many is that?
14.
That's all 14?
That's all 14, yeah.
Well, this is what I'm scared of, and what I was hoping you guys could give me your opinion on is, I go back and forth every day. Okay, I'm going to be in a gulag. I'm not going to be in a gulag. Earth is going to end. Maybe it's not going to end. I mean, it seems to me like we're heading toward, we'll definitely have fascism if any Republican gets in. If Trump gets in, for sure. DeSantis gets in, which I don't think he will because he's so hapless, for sure. But I don't know, like if Biden does get reelected, the states, all over state legislature, Republicans are either defying the law or finding ways to use the law to thwart democracy. So, it's like whack-a-mole, like these things are popping up all over. I don't know how much a Democratic administration could do it. Also, I fear sometimes, and I don't know, I'd like your opinion, if Democrats, I know they haven't done enough for many years, but I'm wondering if, I wish Biden was stronger, but I don't know that much about the structure of government to know what he could get away with doing and what he couldn't get away with doing. I just know I'm frustrated that Democrats in general are not more aggressive. They don't seem to understand that the Republicans waged war against us, and it became evident with Newt Gingrich back in the 90s when he said they were at war.
Well, that's the thing about the finger pointing is that they criticize Biden for being weak, but if he took more overtly stronger positions, they'd say, "Oh, he's a dictator, right? He just wants to be a dictator." So they always speak out both sides of their mouth. I mean, they've done that in a number of states. They do that with state governors. Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, she's weak, she's a woman, but then when she takes action, oh, she's a dictator. I feel like these guys, should be in. They remind me of they sit in the back of a 10th grade high school classroom going, "The teacher's a dictator, man." You know, it's like that's how they sound. But yeah, that's exactly it. Is it so? If Biden were to take a more, it's not his personal style, but if he were to take a more overtly, I don't know, stronger positions, at least with his speech, then they would be criticizing. They do both sides. They criticize him for and it's kind of like the economy. Is that
bullying is precisely the idea?
Right.
We cannot. They cannot react because they're being bullied, because they're never going to be right, no matter what they do.
Right.
So, to me, they might as well be as strong as they want to. Like Merrick Garland, I'm sure is doing a good job, but I would have hired more of a Bill Barr type, but honest. Like, we're not hired. It's the improper
appointed.
word. Yeah.
Well, but here's when you talk about bullies. This is exactly what they do. Have you ever remember growing up when a bully like took your toy away from you, and you'd say, "Give it back, kid, give it back," and then they'd break it and hand it back to you. Go there, it's broke anyway, right?
Yeah.
And so they'd break it and then they'd hand it back and say, "Shit, well, this thing stinks. It's broke anyway." Well, they just broke it, and that's what Republicans do with government. Whenever they get it in their hands, they break it, and then the people say, "No, you look what you guys did," and they hand it back to the Democrats, and then they go, "Look, that thing's broke anyway," and then the Democrats always inherit some kind of disaster from the Republicans that takes time to fix, and then people expected that the Democrats were supposed to move ahead, but they spent the whole time cleaning up the mess that the Republicans created. And then when then they get frustrated with Democrats, they give it back to Republicans. This cycle, and the Republicans go ahead and finish the job they were doing, raiding the Treasury and so on, and giving all kinds of sweetheart deals and to their friends in big business and people. And then this cycle goes on and on. That's all we ever see in government. That people don't realize the Republicans are there to break government. They don't like government. I don't understand why they say vote for me. Vote for me for government. Government is terrible. What else would you do with it for a candidate that says, "Yeah, government's horrible. I'm going to break it," so they can't do anything to hurt you. And that the whole Republican agenda now is to and they'll say it. They don't have it. They don't have a platform or any policies. It's to stop the liberals. Just stop the woke liberals. That's the only thing that's important to them, because the woke liberals are turning your children gay, and it's all about the children, and God is on our side. That's pretty much all they have. But I would say this: fascism is here pretty strongly. Whether it can gain political advantage, first of all, it already has. But I remember in the Sinclair Lewis's book, "You Can't Have It Here," he wrote in 1936, and he wrote, "When fascism comes to America." By the way, the Donald Trump figure in that book was named Buzz Windrip. I always thought that was the Donald Trump character would have been called. His name was Buzz Windrip. And Sinclair Lewis said, "When fascism comes to America, it'll be wrapped in the flag and carrying a Bible." And little did they know that, or did he imagine that it would be some dumbass like Donald Trump, who doesn't have anything, has no patriotism, and holds the Bible upside down. I mean, he's just like, for a photo op, he holds the Bible upside down. What's so bad? Get Your Table Progressive back with you here on AM 820 WCPT, Chicago's Progressive Talk. And I want to get into here in our last segment, of course, Donald Trump charged in the January 6th riot, on the attack on the Capitol. 4 charges, 1 count each, 4 charges of defrauding, lies in which are defrauding and obstructing official proceedings of the United States of America. And the 4 charges, it seems like a pretty slimly tailored case. Analysts say that this is built for speed so that they can get this. It's not 40 charges that a jury has to look at. It's 4 counts, 4 charges and 1 count of each charge, which should be a pretty speedy trial. And I don't think the discovery is going to have to be that in depth in terms of a lot of things to exchange if there are just 4 counts. And that the discovery is what the evidence that the attorneys exchange. So Jack Smith's office will have to hand over, share with the Trump defense team the evidence that he intends to use in his prosecution. That's what the discovery is. And whatever evidence that the defense team has will have to be shared with Jackson. Both sides have to share evidence. Then they will argue with the judge about which of the evidence will be admitted in court. And they'll have various arguments as to why certain things should not be admitted based on relevance and things like that. And whether there's privileged evidence. Donald Trump will claim lots of privileged evidence. But there are some things that I wanted to talk about the whole January 6th that we haven't heard mentioned in this whole thing. The first one is that it requires a little bit of civics here. And that is that Donald Trump, there were actually 2 elections. There was the vote on November 3rd, the popular vote, where we all went to the polls and voted in our states. That election, those elections are run by the states, and the Constitution says in Article 2, Section 2, beginning second paragraph, that actually it says in Article 1 that the states shall determine how to run elections. The federal government may not interfere with that. The states will determine how they will run their elections. Since 1880, the states, in the beginning, you could only vote for your representative in the House of Representatives. That's the only federal office you were allowed to vote for, was your congressman or congresswoman, but in those days it was congressman. In those days, you couldn't even vote for your senator. You weren't allowed to vote for your senator until 1913. The 17th Amendment passed in 1913, which allowed the people of the states to vote for their senator. Before that, the state legislatures appointed the 2 senators from each state. So in 1913, the people got the right to vote for directly for their senator representing them in Washington, D.C. But we never got the federal right, a constitutional right is what I mean, to vote for president. The reason you vote for president is because your state legislature passed a law, and it was finally in 1880 that all of the legislatures in the states passed laws that allowed the citizens to vote for president. And that popular vote is what determined how the legislatures determined that they would send electors to vote for president. And in this case, in 2020, it was on December 14th. The electors met in their own state capitals and cast their votes, however many electors there were. And that is the sum total of your representatives in Congress plus 2 senators. So however many that is in your state. I'm not sure in Illinois. I think that might be 16. They have 2 senators and 14 representatives. That's how many you get. But the actual vote for president is not a right that you have as a constitutional right. It's what the state legislature allows. So how the electors are determined is really not. It's not a federal thing. So when Donald Trump claimed that there was fraud, it doesn't really matter anymore after the popular vote was certified. Where there was fraud, where there may have been fraud, it would be up to those states to prosecute the people that committed the fraud. But it doesn't have anything to do with the outcome of the election. The electors who go to the state capitals. They're not even constitutionally bound. We send slates of electors because most of the states have winner take all, Democrat or Republican, but they're not bound to do that. And there have been rogue electors who voted for somebody else other than the candidate that they were supposed to vote to, because they're not constitutionally bound to do that. So the point being is, when Donald Trump obstructed the vote, and by the way, isn't stop the steal, isn't that obstruction? That's obstruction. So that's what it's intended to do, obstruct, stop the steal. And it doesn't matter whether it's violent or peaceful. They could have had a sit-in and got in front of all the doors of the Capitol where the Congress couldn't get into the building, and that's still obstruction. But what they were trying to obstruct was the vote of the electors, which was on December 14th. Nobody ever claimed that there was fraud or dead electors voting. So his obstruction of that had nothing to do with his claim that there was voter fraud in the states. Whatever voter fraud there might have been in the states, if you want to consider that, was irrelevant once the state boards of electors certified the popular vote. That's it. That's because it's just a matter that the states could hold a beauty contest if they wanted to determine how the electors will vote on December 14th. We now have all the states allow us to have a popular vote for president, but that's only because that's the way the state legislatures have determined that that's how they want to send the electors to the state capitals to vote for president. So when Donald Trump obstructed the vote on January 6th, which he did, they obstructed, and that was an official proceeding. That's the one thing he's being charged with, obstructing an official proceeding of the United States. The claims that he has free speech rights, that's false, because Donald Trump, as the president of the United States, you have to remember this. Free speech rights are the First Amendment right that protects the people of the United States from infringement on their political speech by the government of the United States. The government of the United States and the United States are two different things. The United States is the union of the 50 states, and the people of the several states are the members of the union. And so for Donald Trump to say that he had free speech rights to contest the election, he is the government. He's what the First Amendment protects us from. He was the head of the federal government. So he doesn't have rights per se. What government has are powers. And if you look in any of the articles, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, it says in Article 2, the executive power of the United States will be vested in one president. He was the president. And so in his powers, there's nowhere that it describes that he could do what he did to obstruct the government. He was trying to defraud the United States. The only thing that was done that was fraud and the lie was the Republicans trying to submit the fake electors that were not the ones that the states had sent by their state laws. They were not the ones. They tried to defraud the United States by saying we're the ones that the states that our particular state, Michigan, Arizona, whatever, we're the ones that they sent, and they weren't. And that's why it's fraud. They signed their own names, that's true, but they signed their own names to phony documents, and that's still fraud. It was an attempt to deceive, to cause injury, where they had no basis for it, because there was going to be no review of the electors' votes. There was no allegation that there was any fraud. The other thing that Donald Trump says is that he got bad advice. I don't know why he wants to use this because first of all, it acknowledges that he did it, and secondly, your attorney, if you try to claim inadequate counsel, what that means, that's not a defense. That's actually an appeal. You can claim inadequate counsel if you lost a case, and you can say, I got bad advice. I appeal my case because I had inadequate counsel. It's not a defense for an action that you took outside of court. because this comes under the umbrella of attorney-client privilege. And what it means is that there has to be an attorney that gave you that advice, has to be an attorney that you retained for advice in certain proceedings in court. And that was the advice that you got back regarding the proceedings, the pending proceedings in court, not actions that you might take outside of court, but it has to be your attorney that you paid. Well, Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman never represented Donald Trump in court. So they were not his attorney. You can't just say any old attorney. These attorneys told me, and therefore I was misled. That's too bad. It wasn't your attorney. And besides, an attorney, even if it were your attorney, cannot advise you to take actions outside of court, because attorneys are officers of the court. So the only thing that they can give you advice on is proceedings in court. Actions outside of the court are not covered by that. And by the way, if once you throw your attorney under the bus, even if these were his attorneys, there is no more attorney-client privilege, because obviously the attorney has a right to claim, no, I didn't do that. And there is no more, the attorney doesn't have to continue to respect the client's confidentiality if the client is throwing him under the bus. So those are the holes in Donald Trump's claims of defense. I don't know how this is going to, he's going to obstruct it every which way he can. Jen, how did you, we're running out of time here, but how did you see this week? What did you think of it?
Well, Paul, I just want to say thanks for laying that out so clearly and so well. It helps me to digest it even just a little better. But I'm not going to answer your question. I'm going to ask you a question, which is, okay. Didn't the Biden administration do something to pass some law when they had the House and the Senate to strengthen the Electoral Count Act? They did something so that it would be more difficult to try and do this again in the future.
Yeah, they did pass the electoral. I think they did pass it, didn't they?
They did. They strengthened it somehow, maybe so that maybe they made it law that the electors that are chosen.
Well, thanks for joining us once again here on Kitchen Table Progressive. You can check us out on our website on kitchentableprogressive.com. You can see a video podcast of this on our YouTube channel. Thanks to Jen Senko for joining us. Thanks a whole bunch for that. And join us next Sunday at 6 p.m. directly following the family meeting for Kitchen Table Progressive right here on AM 820 WCPT, Chicago's Progressive Talk. We'll see you next week.